Welcome to the Radical Bureaucrat, a podcast for people who want to change institutions from the inside.
Sounds like you're chuckling, Abram. Today is Tuesday, April 7th. Today, Abram and I are going to do something a little different. Instead of interviewing a guest, we're going to highlight what we're recognizing as the two of the radical bureaucrats of the coronavirus.
Yeah, that's right. We should be clear that there are so many people who have sacrificed and demonstrated a giving spirit through this, like the countless medical workers who are giving so much of themselves. Mario Salerno, the Brooklyn landlord who canceled rent on his 18 apartment buildings for the month of April. All these people are worthy of recognition. Anyone really out there putting people above things that are less important, frankly, than the well-being of people. Today, though, we're talking about something a little bit more specific, right, Sam?
That's right. We're talking about radical bureaucrats. And like I said, we're going to highlight two of them. And as we tried to figure out who to highlight, we came up with three criteria. So number one is we were looking for people who demonstrated a deeply held value in the well-being of others.
Yeah, and the second one is people who are willing to contradict their employers for the greater good. So that's people who really thought critically about what made sense to best serve their colleagues or the general public or both. And they put themselves on the line even when they knew it went against their employer's mandates.
That's right. And the third is that we were looking for people who actually lost their jobs standing up for their beliefs. A question we always grapple with is when and whether we would be willing to spend all our chips to actually lose our jobs in order to do what is right. The people we are highlighting here recognize the importance of the moment, and they knew they could not live with themselves unless they did the right thing. And we think this is a relevant question for everybody, because everybody who has a job has a boss, whether you're a politician whose bosses are the voters or anyone else at any level. At some point, you might be faced with that question of, am I willing to spend my chips on this?
Yeah, am I willing to go all in?
That's right.
Yeah, so we when we started the podcast, we did season one. We had some really fun early conversations about what exactly we were trying to put out, and this idea of rocking the boat without falling out, which is a reference to a specific episode. You'll have to hunt in the archives to find it. Was like a really crystal clear idea that came. How do you rock the boat, agitate, but not fall out, and not make everybody else fall out too? But also, what we're really talking about today is different. It's not rock the boat, don't fall out, right, Sam? It's
right. Yeah, I mean, maybe we should call change the tagline to rock the boat and don't fall out, unless it's a once in a lifetime moment and your sacrifice will make a difference for the greater good.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
That's a little long for a hashtag, but I think listeners get the idea. I think we might have to name the award after someone. So let us know out there if you have any ideas of stories that you think fit the criteria, or who you think we should name the rock the boat and time very carefully and strategically you're falling out of it award. Yeah,
yes,
that wasn't good
please
either.
Do.
That was very wordy.
Right. So for now, we're just going to call the award the Radical Bureaucrats of the Coronavirus. And we're going to get into it. So, again, I want to say that in a moment when there's so many people putting their actual lives on the line, so many people are losing their careers as a result of this pandemic, we want to make sure that we're not doing hero worship here. Everybody is making a sacrifice. Many people are making the ultimate sacrifice. And we just think this particular type of sacrifice is worth highlighting. It's what the show is all about. So, Abram, want to start us off?
Yeah, for sure. Let's start with the story of Chris Smalls. So I actually didn't know about this story until Sam pointed it out to me. But I usually do well with stories and readings that Sam gives me. Yeah, so Chris Smalls...
You better.
So Chris Smalls was on Staten Island. Shout out to Staten Island, Wu-Tang Clan and the whole family. So in yeah, that's right. So in Staten Island, there's an Amazon facility where Chris Smalls was a frontline manager who started to field a lot of concerns from his direct reports, workers
Mm-hmm.
at the Amazon facility about COVID-19, people with symptoms, with questions about sick time, with issues, and a typical moment where you become the receiving point of all sorts of tension that's working itself out in the community and the organization. And so Chris Smalls decided really to lead. He
Mm-hmm.
organized and led a walkout that made national headlines. And he started his open letter to his boss, which he published online at The Guardian, this way. He says, "Dear Jeff Bezos, when I applied to work at Amazon, the job description was simple. It said you need to have a high school diploma or a GED, general educational development, and you have to be able to lift 50 pounds. That's it. Now, because of COVID-19, we're being told that Amazon workers are, quote, the new Red Cross. But we don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be heroes. We're regular people. I don't have a medical degree. I wasn't trained to be a first responder. We shouldn't be asked to risk our lives to come into work, but we are, and someone has to be held accountable for that, and that person is you." So shout out to Chris. Yeah, bold move, and with the organizing and action to back up the open letter.
Yeah, there's so much here. I mean, I think about a few things. I think about, number one, that organizing has got to be a part of any strategy to make a transformational shift, and that he recognized that and went that route. Even though he's likely to fail and he's already lost his job, he put it on the line, and he's had an impact. I think about, he says they're telling us we're the new Red Cross. But we don't want to be heroes. We're regular people. I don't have a medical degree. I wasn't trained to be a first responder. And
Yeah.
I want to say, people with medical degrees shouldn't have to put their lives on the line either, right? They're supposed to have the equipment to protect themselves. First responders they know that they're risking their lives, but also they know that they should be properly equipped. And people in warehouses also should be properly equipped. Like, they know that they're
Yeah.
delivering an important service, but this is about, you can't just tell me that I'm the Red Cross, that this is a war on this disease, and now I'm supposed to sacrifice my life. I often feel, what we're talking about here is he was feeling exploited, and the feeling of being exploited for whatever reason in whatever industry, I think, can be familiar to a lot of people. In education, sometimes, oftentimes school staff are expected to really, to allow themselves to be exploited for the greater good, even though we know that their salaries are not what they should be, or working conditions are not what they should be. And even if you are a great educator, you don't sign up to be exploited, and you're not there. That's not what you're there for. I think we can, most people would agree on that. And so I'm sure that Chris Smalls would love to deliver this service and also get paid for it and be able to provide for his 3 kids. But it crossed the line for him. And he knew that he was not only putting himself at risk, he was putting his coworkers at risk, he was putting his family members at risk by going in there. So,
Yeah, I mean,
and then the last thing I want to say too is, he knew the consequences, and he did it anyway. And I think that's what you're going to see in both of these cases that we're highlighting. People know, I'm probably going to get fired for what I'm about to do, and he did it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, there's a real tension here. No one is trained for what we're going through, right? A lot of students, right, very early in their careers, or what may be the abrupt ending of a dream of a career, right, are being recruited into a lot of crazy stuff right now. I was looking at a chart, and I don't know if this is too depressing or something like that, but listen, I sort of every morning look through and see what kind of data has been released and how does that compare to what we've seen before. And this morning I found on a Reddit thread, actually, the comparisons in average daily deaths right now, every day in the United States and globally, compared to long campaigns of the U.S. military, and then specific battles, and we're at the kinds of levels where societies are reconfigured. Over things like battles in the Civil War, where you get to Gettysburg and it's so bad, the number of people who are dying, you can't ignore it, right? And I think we're experiencing something like that in the space of a month. And so, what I love about this story is that it follows in a long tradition of people who stand with the people, with the laborers. That is about as New York as it gets, isn't it?
Yeah.
The garment workers movement, all the way through to today, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's part of the fabric of the city. It's a part of what makes New York City what it is, that people have a perspective on what their job is and what it isn't or shouldn't be. And that, that's tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, there's one other thing I wanted to highlight about this story, which is also very similar to what happens in both of these stories. And I think when you speak truth to power and you know that you're sticking your neck out, you can expect that something like this may happen, which is that afterwards it came out that in a meeting of top Amazon leadership, one of the top level guys in the organization, in the company, said that this guy Smalls, who is Black, and that's relevant, was not articulate and not smart. And that is really going to help them, and that they should essentially play that up. And that the more that Smalls was putting himself out there, the more that they would be able to hold this up. And of course, they said when they fired him that it had nothing to do with this protest, that it was because they quarantined him or told him to self-quarantine, and he had come back to the facility during that time, that was the reason they fired him, because he was putting people at risk, right? The company wasn't putting people at risk. He was doing it. And what he says is that, well, in fact, I have coworkers who were far more exposed, who were not told to go home and self-quarantine. So they were not quarantining me out of the goodness of their hearts. But that kind of attack, is something too that I think we're all scared of. I mean, we're scared of losing our jobs, but just as much we're scared of the public humiliation.
Yeah.
And that to me is a real another level kind of courage.
Yeah. Shout out to Chris. Thanks, man. I hope you're doing well. I'm not sure it's probably early days yet, and you're probably at home like the rest of us, but shout out to Chris.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's another case we want to highlight. This one's getting even more press. In fact, the headline just broke like an hour before we're recording on this one. This is about Captain Brett Crozier, who was the commander in charge of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a warship in the Pacific in the Navy. And what was happening was, I guess it's been about a little over a week, they were starting to get cases of coronavirus on the ship. And, these are ships where the crew bunk in very close quarters. They all have shared bathrooms, which is like the worst place to spread a virus. They eat in the same mess hall. And there's like 4,000 to 5,000 people on this ship. And so very quickly, the number of people on the ship, number of crew members who were getting confirmed cases was multiplying. And he also noticed that people were getting tested and they were coming back with negative results. But then a few days later, they were exhibiting more symptoms and getting positive results. And so he's like, this is out of control. What he said was, look, what a test is only so useful at this point. Like, we have a total disaster on our hands. And the CDC guidelines are very, very clear about what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to self-quarantine, and that is impossible. a warship. And so uh, who knows what he had done to try to escalate this, but ultimately what he did was he wrote a letter to a whole bunch of people in the Navy. He when he was fired, the I forget what the acting Navy secretary said, that he sent it to like 20 or 30 people. I don't know if that's true. But he sent it to enough people that it was leaked to the press. And not surprisingly, right? When you copy a bunch of people, when you go outside the chain of salud, when you go outside the chain of command, you in the military, you know what you're getting into. So like Chris Smalls, he knew what he was getting into, and within 3 days, this acting Navy secretary, Thomas Maudley, fired him. But then Thomas Maudley kept going, so he went and spoke to the crew of the ship, and in his comments to the crew, he said Crozier was either too naive or too stupid to be a leader, and he dropped a bunch of F-bombs or something, and basically slandered him, and this afternoon, Motley had to resign because, fortunately there was people knew who was on the right side of history on this one. Just like I think people know who's on the right side of history when you have an Amazon run by one of the, if not the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest people in the world, who is asking his frontline workers to put themselves in harm's way. And so that's where it's at, and
yeah,
go ahead.
I started kind of down this rabbit hole a little bit on fleets. I kind of think of Pirates of the Caribbean, right, where Jack Sparrow makes the other one a Commodore, and he gets a bigger hat. And there's kind of this like thing in the uniformed armed services, the bars and bars of metals, and the idea of a career, a naval career, which grounds actually a lot of our careers. If we watch Star Trek, or if we watched any of these shows, West Wing, this kind of ideas of the military and how the military is organized, ideas of respect and really manliness, right? Manhood, masculinity, right? On display. And my grandfather was a United States Marine, and I only say was because he passed. The grandfather who passed me the name Guerra was a United States Marine Corps private first class with a Purple Heart and a couple of other things and some really good stories. And yeah, these folks serving on boats, confined spaces, right? Like, wow. And the power structure that allows, a $1 trillion ship to exist.
Yeah.
And that ship is at the command of this guy in this house, in this city, on this river with these monuments, right?
I mean, it's a massive amount of responsibility. Just it's almost inconceivable. And I want to point out that, there's a political context to this. I guess there's some news reports that Trump said to fire the guy. He got fired within 3 days after sending this letter, which is like, obviously there was not an in-depth investigation of what the actual circumstances were. And meanwhile, Trump has pardoned a Navy SEAL who clearly was assassinating people in, I believe it was Afghanistan. And so there's the leadership from the very top of the country. I think we're seeing at all levels right now has an impact on the context we're all operating in, and the context for all leaders at every level.
Yeah.
I just, what both of these cases really highlight for me is the kind of critical thinking it takes to say the emperor has no clothes here, right? Like that is so rare to be able to recognize when there's something that is this is not making sense, and then have a strong enough set of personal values to say this is not something I can live with if I don't do something, and then have the courage to do it, even though you're putting your job on the line, or that you are, going to potentially be publicly humiliated, and have lasting consequences, be blackballed potentially in your whole field. So, but the first part, right, Abram, like how often we operate in paradigms where we're so accustomed to doing things in a certain way. and then you say, well, wait, someone said we can't do that. And it's like, well, no, but we have to do it. That's the way we do things here, right?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I guess I say that a lot, right? Oh, it's tough. It's a tension. Yeah. I think there's no right way through it. I think that's why coaching exists, and, relationships with peers, and, with bosses, and, real relationships, right? So that when your person in the warehouse comes to you and says, look, this just happened with my family, right? Like you come from a place of humanity, from care, right? For people. Putting that first and foremost. And then it's almost like too much yoga, like if you hold the yoga pose too long, you start to get a cramp, like we're going to be stuck in this position of waiting and looking out for each other and all that. Whether here is this nonstop television news. I was looking at this other data visualization of the relative price of different kinds of goods in the consumer price index, which is how we measure inflation. And the cost of college had tripled over the last 30 years, 300%. And the cost of cell phones and internet access had plummeted. And so, we may not have colleges because they're too expensive and we can't afford them. We might just have cell phones and YouTube videos and Zoom calls and podcasts. That might be what drives the human race forward. And maybe that's what we're learning, sitting at home, trying to figure out how our Wi-Fi works, right?
Yeah. Well, we just, we want to say that again, Captain Crozier, Chris Smalls, we salute you.
Absolutely.
And,
we salute you.
And I was thinking, it's not that I'm encouraging anybody to, tell off their boss.
Is that the secret motive behind this theme?
If my bosses are listening, it's not that I secretly want to tell you off.
Same.
I think that, but so we want to give that caveat to this podcast.
Yeah. They've already heard everything we have to say. They know.
Yeah, if they're listening. But my boss has someone else who's his boss, right? And so on and so on. So this is something that is, like I said earlier, I think relates to everybody. When do you see that moment when things do not line up, and what are you willing to do it in that moment? And most people won't find themselves in this type of situation in their life, but just so happens we're in a moment where a couple of these stories have come to the surface, and we saw it before in the national news on the Ukraine story with the whistleblower. And so this is happening right now, and seems relevant to what we're talking about.
In real time, faster than we can keep up with.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that counts as the good radicals portion. That's kind of what we take away from all of this, right?
Sure. Yeah. So we just, again, want to highlight those folks. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have nominations for other radical bureaucrats who we should call out. Let us know on Twitter or through our website, radicalbureaucrat.com. And we're going to end by being good bureaucrats. The views expressed here are our personal opinions and do not reflect the official or unofficial position of any government agency, policy, party, leader, or really anyone besides the two of us, and maybe you, but maybe not. This content has not been sponsored or approved by anyone and was mostly just made because we wanted an opportunity to talk about things that matter to everyone, whether they realize it or not. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, everybody.